Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Pink Mike Leo Confessions. Today, we are talking about a really interesting topic that has to do with real estate. So, thank you all for joining me today. As you know, I'm Stephanie Garces, owner of Garces Law Firm, where we help parents secure their legacy and actually prepare for the unexpected for everybody, including real estate clients, which is one of our topics today. And it's really important that you guys kind of understand what our role is when we are attorneys representing a client. Real estate attorneys are in Illinois used, and we'll talk about a little bit about that in just a second. But we are kind of talking about this area of the law because I'm really passionate about real estate. Financial planning, estate planning, real estate law all go hand in hand. And in today's market, you really have to be aware of these areas and what are things that you should know about each of them. And working with a lawyer to help you guide you through all of this is a really good investment, and it's money well spent. So someone who's well versed in all three is the best way to get the best results. So today I'm going to answer a couple of questions, but the topic of today is, what does a real estate attorney do at a closing? Now, when I say a closing, that's typically where the real estate attorney appears and helps with a transaction, facilitating the transfer of the property. So the housing market, as you guys know, is on fire. It's on fire. And this hasn't really stopped. And it's such an interesting thing for me to talk about this because I feel like when we talk about the housing market being on fire, we're actually talking about in the midst of a pandemic, right? That is pretty obvious. So for anyone in real estate, they'll agree with me that this is crazy, and it's not slowing down. I think it's actually getting a little bit more hectic. Especially as the spring market is coming. I know dead of winter, it is a little bit slower for some of us, but not necessarily. And so with homes flying off the shelves, selling in a number of hours, sometimes days, above market value, and actually, I would say in some cases, even without an appraisal, which is crazy because, you would think most people would want to do an appraisal, but sometimes there's been reasons to waive that. Even inspection conditions, people have been waiving inspection. They've seen that more often than not. To me, it's interesting because I've never really seen this sort of market where people are doing this more than ever before. And I think a lot of it has to do with this housing bubble and this housing market that we're in. You would think in a pandemic, things would slow down. You think people would say, you know what, I'm tight on my funds, let me not do this. But it's actually the complete opposite. So thank you for joining me today because I really want to talk about this. And quite frankly, hiring a professional. It's really important to hire a professional when handling your real estate closing. And it makes so much sense. And you'll see why by the end of this pink mic, so you kind of understand why it's important and essential to have an attorney by your side. Now, many people, this is the first time they're selling, the first time they're buying, or perhaps you have experience with this. You don't really understand what the role of an attorney is, but be sure you know exactly what the lawyer's role is and responsibilities are before you hire them. So very important. Let's dive right in. So first, the biggest breakdown of what a real estate attorney's role is to, one, advocate for the client. Advocating for the client, whether it's a buyer or a seller that they're representing, is very important. Keep in mind that when you hire an attorney that does real estate for your closing, we represent you. We don't represent the lender. We don't represent the agents in the file. We don't represent the title company. We just look out for your best interest. So it's very unbiased in a way, in that we don't have really skin in the game, so to speak. So it's important to hire someone that's objective, is just to look out for your best interests as a buyer or the seller. Keep in mind, too, that some people will ask, can you hire people to do both sides? So we'll talk about that in just a little bit, but it is going to be covered. So the other thing we do outside of just representing your interests through the moment you sign the contract to the closing, sometimes even after, when there's other issues that arise, we also act as negotiators. Almost a mediator, I think is a good way to put it, between two parties. Keep in mind that the seller typically has their own attorney, so we may represent them or someone else does. The other party, being the buyer, has a separate attorney, a separate realtor, has their own lender. So typically each party has their own attorney. Now, as attorneys, we usually represent the clients. We have conversations. We try to mediate for what each client wants to make sure you get the best result. The other thing that we do is we ensure that all the areas of the legal process, especially when it comes to buying a piece of real estate, have been addressed, have been diagnosed, really like from A to Z when it comes to what is it, the problems that we see here, legal problems. We also make sure that we comply with the rules, whether that rule is legal rules. There are, as you know, rules with the law and contract law, but also local rules. For example, like different villages, different cities, different counties. There's an infinite number of rules, and I'm sure anyone watching that's in real estate knows what I'm talking about, because the amount of rules there are for municipalities is a lot, and every municipality is different. So if you live in the city of Chicago, there's a lot more rules and different type of rules than if you live in the Chicago suburbs. Or if you even go out west, out to more rural towns, there's also different requirements. So there is a lot of requirements. So we do make sure that we're in compliance with those rules in the state, with the law, and in municipalities where the property is located, where it's being purchased or where it's being sold. Now, we're tasked with a lot of responsibility. I know this is obvious, but I do want to break it down so that you understand what it is that we do in this process. So if you oversee the real estate transaction, and really, if your attorney is well-versed in this, they do know that ahead of the closing, there's a lot of work to be done. Part of the responsibility is looking over the contract, making sure that everything that was agreed to is in the contract. For example, I want to take the television. I'm going to take that with me. Maybe you're a seller and you have a nice TV that you're taking with you. That would be stipulated in the contract. If you're buying one property that is maybe 2 lots, sometimes there's 2 lots and you're only selling one of them, that would be in the contract. If you are selling anything specific to the buyer, that would be in the contract. If you're providing something that is outside the norm, that would be in the contract, and so on and so forth. So we do make sure that ahead of the transaction, everything gets stipulated, everything gets sorted out, and there isn't any misrepresentations or miscommunications. And sometimes there are, which is also why we step in to try to fix it if there were an issue. But for the most part, a lot of this work of reviewing the documents and the terms of the transaction really get us in a better place. So that's really one of our responsibilities, to make sure you're protected, make sure that you're served, and make sure that you understand your rights throughout the process. Because after all, signing a real estate contract is still a contract at the end of the day. So there are contract laws and principles that apply to this. Another one of our responsibilities that is important is organizing the closing, completing the paperwork ahead of time. When we represent sellers, for example, there's a lot of paperwork that has to be drafted, from the deed of the home, making sure that the title of the home is clear, making sure we've complied with the requirements for the city or perhaps the county, that we have all parties that are interested in this property, have interest in this property, to sign on the paperwork that is necessary. Sometimes there's even things that pop up that are outside the norm that we have to address. For example, some paperwork is necessary if you're an investor. That's what I'm trying to think. Investor. Typically, the investors tend to have contractors that did work. So it's important for us to do the paperwork, look at everything, make sure there aren't any liens, meaning no one is owed money by you. And typically that's kind of some of the paperwork that goes on the sell side. We obviously also look over the numbers of what you're going to be either getting from the sale, or perhaps you have to pay things off. So there's a number of things that we have to organize, and it takes a lot of manpower. It takes a lot of, or woman power in my case, to do this. So there's a lot of paperwork that goes in ahead of time. Same with the buyer. The buyer has a lot of paperwork through the process. They even have more paperwork when it goes to the closing. So we do review that at the actual closing. So when I say necessary paperwork, we make sure everything's completed, everything's accurate, and there isn't anything missing. The other thing that is a big responsibility as a real estate attorney is to be present. be present. Make sure we understand the files. We understand what's going on with your file. We advise you to the best way possible, especially with thorny issues. There's certain issues that come up that are really not super common, and we try to guide you in the best way possible because we do have experience with this. So we try to say, okay, this is what the best case scenario is. This is the worst case scenario. And we always keep in mind your best interest and try to guide you through the process. We also ensure that everything is complied with on the day of closing. So if for some reason the day of closing it was supposed to be something left at the property, or maybe there's damage to the property, or there was a repair that the seller was supposed to do that wasn't done, or perhaps the buyer was supposed to do something on there and that wasn't done. We make sure that everything is taken care of, and we make sure things are sorted out. Typically when this happens, they're called walkthrough issues. So if you have a walkthrough issue the day of closing, whether you're a seller or a buyer, usually the attorneys communicate with one another. So each attorney that represents one of the parties will communicate with each other to try to sort out some of the issues that have arisen. And so the goal is to try to reach an agreement if possible so that we can actually close the transaction. So sometimes there is a second bite at the apple when it comes to this. Many times I tell clients, if there is an issue, we can always go back and try to address it before you actually close. So we make sure that we are present, helping you throughout some of these issues. Now, I just want to do a recap really quickly for some of you that are just joining me now. My name is attorney Stephanie Garces. I'm an owner of Garces Law Firm, where we help parents secure their legacy and prepare you for the unexpected. My website is below me, and you can always text or call to make appointments. But thank you so much for joining us. This is Pink Mike Legal Confessions. We cover topics that are important to the viewers and really just important for you to know your rights. We try to use our platform to do that. And we actually help individuals a lot, couples, families and parents create legacies and legacy plans and secure their financial future. And so part of that is also real estate. We help protect it. We help do the closing. We help do a lot of the stuff that really should be thought of when you're thinking about buying property. So if you missed the last session, you can always watch it on my Facebook page. That topic last week was very important, so you may want to watch it, but it was about estate planning. This one, though, today, we're talking about real estate. We're talking about why you need an attorney at closing and what an attorney that's a real estate attorney actually does at the closing. What do? We don't just sit there and hang out and talk to the client. We actually do have to do a lot of work before and the day of closing. So like I said, I always welcome you guys to watch me on Tuesdays at 1 o'clock Central Time as I share tips and legal guidance for parents, for guardians, or in this case, for real estate potential sellers and buyers that are in the process of doing this or thinking of doing it. So I know a lot of you have questions about some of the things we've discussed today, and we're going to get to those in just a second. But keep in mind that, as I mentioned before, having a real estate attorney on your side is one of the best investments you can make. Think about it this way. You're buying a house or you're selling your house, and there's a lot of money. These are big transactions, right? Sometimes it's even in the six-figure range, sometimes a seven-figure range. So you want to protect your investment. So we're talking about why you should have an attorney, what we actually do with the closing, and why does it even matter? And it totally matters. And we'll talk about it in just a second. One of the questions I got while I was sitting here, someone had asked me, is a real estate attorney required to purchase or sell a house in Illinois? This is a really great question because people always think it's required, and that's a myth, actually. But I will tell you, there's plenty of states that don't use attorneys. However, Illinois is one that actually does. So while it's not required in Illinois, that does not necessarily mean it is not a good investment. It's not a good idea. For the reasons I stated earlier, having an attorney with a real estate transaction makes sense. It's just common sense. If it's a big transaction that you're buying or selling a home, you want your interests protected. And part of that job is having an attorney to represent you. So it's not required in Illinois, which a lot of people are surprised when I say that. However, it is a great idea to have someone on your side. Keep in mind, we do this every day. You may buy and sell once in a blue moon, or perhaps you do it more often than that. But nonetheless, when we do this every day, this is our bread and butter. We know how to handle this. We know how to, get away from some of these pitfalls that you might actually encounter if you were to do this on your own, or perhaps, kind of forego the cost, but it's not worth it. It's not worth it. So yeah, it's not required in Illinois, but definitely recommended, highly recommended, especially someone that does it every day. The other question that I get every so often, it's an interesting question. I've had clients ask me in the past is, can my mortgage broker complete the paperwork for me, then have the real estate lawyer show up at the end for the closing? This is such a fun question because what this question actually implies is that a mortgage broker can just step in, explain the documents that are typically explained at the closing, and that's the end. We just show up at the end. If it was that simple, we wouldn't be in business, right? So typically, yes, can a broker come in and explain? Sure, they can certainly explain some of the documents. That's not against, the rules. However, it's not always done that way. And quite frankly, it's not a good idea to do it that way. Because keep in mind, the mortgage lender just did the loan. They don't know, they're not going to be responsible or even guide you through the things that they really are not within their arena, because that's not part of their job. So it's not within their scope of work to look over the title, to make sure that the title is clear, to make sure the municipality requirements have been met, that all the credits that you were supposed to get through negotiations and all that is on the paperwork, that nothing is missed. That is not within their job. Their job is to be your lender and to make sure you get financing for the transaction. So even though it's a funny question, we don't just show up at the end. It's not recommended that you just have someone explain the documents to you, because like I said, this is one of the biggest investments you'll make in your lifetime. So you certainly want to have someone on your side. Another question I got the other day is, what's the cost of hiring a real estate attorney? Well, the question is, it depends who you hire, because people charge different fees, to be honest. But keep in mind that typically when you're hiring a real estate attorney, for the most part, and not everybody, I don't speak for everybody, for the most part, it's a flat fee that you pay. This means flat fee. It's a one-time fee, whether it's $500, $750, $850, whatever the fee is going to be. You want to discuss this with your attorney ahead of time to make sure you're comfortable with the fee. And it's a flat fee for the most part. Now, are there attorneys that can charge hourly for the work? Absolutely. Definitely exists. But keep in mind that you'll want to ask these questions ahead of time. So typically a range, I should say, depending on who you hire, it could be low, it could be high. And it really usually doesn't stray away from anywhere from, let's just say, I'm just putting numbers out there for what I've seen. I've seen as low as, $400, and I see as high as, $750, $1,000, $1,500 for some of those attorneys that are doing double the work. So that question really depends on who you hire. But keep in mind that it's not all about the fee, right? It's not always about the money. You just have to have a transparent conversation of what is the attorney doing? What is the going rate? And quite frankly, there's always a good point to think about with this, is that when you're hiring someone, it's about your investment. It's not so much about the fee. I think it's easy for consumers to get wrapped up on like, oh, wow, I'm going to pay this amount. But keep in mind, it's for your best interest. It's the party that helps you facilitate the transaction to make sure that the transfer of the property is clean, that there aren't any issues, and that your investment of many thousands of dollars is actually protected. So it's money well spent. That's the point. The other question I get is, can a real estate attorney help negotiate the purchase or sale on my behalf? Well, absolutely. We certainly help negotiate the transaction. But there is a fine line, right? As attorneys, we can't act as realtors. So we're not negotiating, initially when you put an offer in. We're usually not in the picture then. We usually come into the picture as soon as this contract is signed by the seller and the buyer. Why is that? Why don't we get involved before? Well, look, it's not to say we can't get involved before, but typically what happens is there has to be a contract signed. Once a contract is signed, it makes it binding, it makes it legal. So basically, at that point, we get to review it. And there is a time period, about 5 business days, that we get to review the contract. We speak with the client, make sure that everything that you signed, you are okay with, and we approve or disapprove those terms during that time. We can also make changes, which are known modifications, to the contract. So there is a time period that goes by where we do get involved in negotiating the contract a little bit further. And that is a whole conversation, because it comes down to negotiating your inspection items if you're doing an inspection. If you're a seller, you wait for the buyer to do their inspection, and then we kind of see, okay, what are the things they're asking for, and we negotiate that way. Negotiations can be in the form of credits. Sometimes the parties will give each other credits. The seller will say, I'll credit you for this, for, the broken window that's at my home. Sometimes it'll be in the form of a repair. Okay, I'll repair this by the time the closing happens. So it depends. There's also other transactions when there's not a ton of negotiation. Perhaps you're buying the property as is, which means in the condition that it's in. So you may, depending on your situation, may not have a ton of things to negotiate. But nonetheless, we do negotiate those items. Another thing we help negotiate that's very important, and I think it's one of the most underrated things that we help negotiate, is taxes. Sometimes properties have assessed values, meaning at least where we are in Illinois, every 3 years is a triennial assessment, meaning the county assesses the property, the value of it, and it could go up, which basically equals to the property being taxed higher. So if you're buying a property and the tax rate or the tax has changed, you'll want us to negotiate that for you. And only someone that is familiar with real estate and does this every day and is well versed in this area can actually identify those issues. So we do negotiate taxes if that comes to light. Another thing we negotiate is terms of the contract. So let's say, for example, the seller isn't moving out. They want to stay. They told me, hey, I want to stay another week. And that's part of the contract. We stipulate to the terms of that. How long are they going to stay? Are we going to have to pay the buyer for that? And if so, how much? There's a lot of things to negotiate. These contracts, even though we see them every day, there's always something new that I learn when it comes to negotiating, because there's just so much to negotiate. I mean, the list goes on. And that's part of our job, is we negotiate to the best of our ability. And of course, clearing it with the client along the way. So we talked about taxes. We've talked about the inspection items. We talked about the closing terms and all of that. Another thing, I talked about this earlier, is negotiating the day of closing issues. So at least, if you've been through this, you may already know what I'm talking about. But every so often, the transaction of the day of is closing day. There's an issue with the property. There's an issue in the numbers. There's an issue somewhere. And so if this issue comes up, we negotiate that with the other side. If we represent the seller, we represent the buyer, we basically confer with the other side's attorneys. And we make sure that we negotiate those items so that you're happy and everyone goes home happy. So negotiating is part of the process. It's constantly happening, and in different flavors, so to speak. But there's a lot to negotiate. So that is really one of the things, one of the few things that we do, negotiating on your behalf. So I try to make the distinction between when you put in the offer and you're negotiating, with the agents. That's where the realtors get involved. But as far as the contract being signed and everything that comes after it through the day of closing, we negotiate a lot. So yes, we can certainly help you negotiate with anything regarding the contract. And quite frankly, negotiation is part of the job. And I always tell people it's open-ended. You can negotiate and, as long as you want, obviously, but keep in mind the parties may not like that. Someone's not going to like negotiating more than the others. So sometimes it's in your best interest to negotiate and have an attorney do it, but within a certain time frame so that everyone can continue on with the transaction. By the way, the negotiation period that I just talked about, that's within the 5-day period, that's called the attorney review period. So that's typically where the negotiations happen. And they're sometimes happy and they're sometimes not happy. So when we talk about this, we make sure that we're in contact with you, because that is where a lot of the decisions are made with regard to the transaction. So I really am thankful that someone asked that question, because it's important to know what is the negotiation that we're doing, why does it matter, and what is the services that we provide. So thank you for asking that question. The other thing is, do we offer virtual appointments or on-site visits? Great question, because the answer is yes, we do both. And keep in mind that we are offering these on a continuous basis, especially with the light of the pandemic. So if you're interested, you can always set up an appointment with us virtually or on site. I think nowadays everyone is really getting used to being virtual, and people like being at home. Yeah, you can Zoom us in the jammies. It's all good. It doesn't matter, as long as you know that, we're going to expect, at least your face on there so we can at least see you. But nonetheless, feel free to always request that. You can text us if you don't feel like calling, or you can call us if you don't feel like texting, but we're always here to service you. And as I mentioned, you can always contact me, and the consultations we have are in Spanish, so hablamos español, or in English. Whatever you guys need, we're here to help. So just keep this in mind when you guys are making appointments, because virtual appointments are the future and we are offering them and we have no issue doing it. So I want to thank all of our viewers who are watching, and our loyal viewers. I know who you are because you've been always checking in with me before the show. I really thank all of you for joining me. Your questions are excellent, and I always enjoy hearing feedback and hearing the questions you may have in regards to what do we do or what do I do, especially when it comes to real estate. So with the craziness of the real estate market, as we know, it's really wild out there, and it's only going to get crazier. I strongly, strongly recommend that you consider hiring a real estate attorney, especially one with a reputable, background, someone who really, really knows this area, can assist you with the transaction, and isn't afraid to really go in and negotiate when the time is necessary, because that's really important for part of a successful transaction. There are a lot of ways a deal can go south or go sideways, and at last minute, it's always good to have an advocate on your side to represent you and no one else, to make sure someone's in your corner ready to go to bat for you. So I invite you here to join me every Tuesday at 1 o'clock Central Time on Pink Mike Legal Confessions. The same time, same place, to talk about another topic. And we're probably going to cover a little bit more about real estate. So you may want to stay tuned, and feel free to share this with your family, with your friends, anyone that would think this is useful. You can always check out our YouTube channel, my Facebook page. All of our Pink Mics are on there. So feel free to chat there if you have any questions, and feel free to share the recordings. You have my permission. So I wish you all well, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for watching.